Afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to today's Demand and Distributed Energy Market Integration Working Group meeting. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs. Just a reminder that today's call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only, and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And please remember to keep your comments professional and respectful today. To ask questions during today's meeting, you can open the participant and chat panels on the bottom right, and you can then raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon, or if you joined audio only, please press *3 on your device. And please remember to state your name and affiliation first before speaking. You can also send comments and questions via chat to all panelists or directly to myself. And if you need technical assistance today during the meeting, please send a chat to the event producer in Teller Events. This here is a visual representation of where we are in the stakeholder process. Here you can see that we're at the beginning of the proposal development stage. And today's agenda will include revisiting the last problem statements with Juan Buitrago, followed by an introduction to reliability-based demand response by Jill Powers. And then we will hear reliability-based demand response stakeholder presentations from the California Large Energy Consumers Association and Southern California Edison. Following this, we'll have a stakeholder discussion on draft problem statement formulation with Juan before we wrap up for the day with next steps. So with that, I will turn things over to Juan Buitrago, an account manager here at the ISO.
All right, thank you, Christina. And just if I could get a thumbs up that I'm coming through loud and clear.
Yep, you're coming through loud and clear.
Very good. Thank you, everybody, for giving us a piece of your afternoon. We apologize in advance for some of the timing changes that happened here, but I'm excited to be back. I missed you guys last session. Let's go ahead and dive into both of our thematic areas. So always want to take stock of where we are in the working group. So we have already level set on the policy area. We do have a good understanding of the issue and challenge areas that the stakeholder community is bringing forth. Now, when I say complete on that one, I will always reiterate this. That doesn't mean that we are not open to something coming up in discovery or a new challenge area coming up that can be reflected within your comments or actual verbal comments during one of these calls. And we're currently in the problem statement and assessment phase. So we will continue on. You see the graphic there on the bottom right-hand corner. This can be iterative, but hopefully everybody did get a chance to see the schedule, the tentative schedule for all the upcoming themes. This is a rather broad working group topic, and we're wanting to make sure that we give each theme its representation. So we will go back from assessment to refining a problem statement where needed, but we are trying to move the conversation forward. So we appreciate your engagement during these calls and then in written comments. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So let's start with the end in mind. The goal of today's working group meeting, and Christina kind of alluded to this already going through the agenda, we want to review what we've heard and really finish the last conversation that started on June 17th, where we heard from stakeholders on the theme of enhancing demand flexibility market options and taking a look at how it is that it compares to participating load models as they exist today within the ISO. We would like to continue that conversation and refine some of those problem statements from that discussion at today's session. We're then going to shift gears and move to our next theme, which is the reliability-based demand response theme. Jill will provide a high-level overview of current reliability-based DR participation and hoping that that is really a good foundation or a primer to go into the upcoming problem statement discussion that we have. And there we're moving on to, as Christina mentioned, hearing from CLECA and Southern Cal Edison to hear their viewpoint on the current reliability-based demand response programs and areas where they see some current issue or challenge areas, and really round that out with trying to come up with some draft problem statements. Hopefully you're beginning to see a little bit of a pattern. I think it's very important for all of us here at the ISO, you as stakeholders, to be able to reflect and let a conversation in one of these working groups kind of marinate a little bit. So when we say that we're drafting these problem statements, we are always going to come back to them in order to refine them. And in fact, our next session, we may very well have quite a bit of time devoted towards refining or finalizing those problem statements. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. So let's go ahead and kind of go through the draft problem statements from that June 17th session. Let's go ahead and move forward. So we heard from from NCPA a presentation on their hydrogen electrolyzer participation, and the problem statement conversation kind of split into two. So what we have here is, in essence, here's what we've heard, and we're seeking this community's input to confirm our understanding of these problem statements as we heard them from NCPA. So please feel free to join in, give a little bit of, if there's any clarifying questions, any areas where you think need further exploration, or simply just an agreement, yes, this is confirmed, we understood it to be the same problem statement. Again, all these problem statements will go towards a future, consideration into a future policy development effort. So as we understood it, the current CAISO market participation models may not best account for the unique components or characteristics of certain large loads, and in particular that operate in a nonlinear fashion. I think that was one of the things that we really took away from that presentation. And then as a related but separate problem statement, certain large loads which produce and or store fuel for later use do not fit well within current energy storage models. So this would be a load that is then its use of that electrical demand is for future generation later on in the day, or perhaps even further out. So taking a look at how those large loads might not fit snugly into current energy storage models. I'm going to pause here, and I would love to see if there are any reactions. And again, inclusive of a confirmation that you understood the same problem statement as well. This would be really helpful for us to be able to focus our efforts on different areas and different themes. So I'm not sure if we have NCPA on the line here. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Mike or Tony, if you're on, or I think I see Lisa. But anyone have, Mike, I do see that you're on. Again, I apologize. I don't mean to put you on the spot. But did I characterize your problem statements correctly? I think yours would be the first opinion that I'd like. And then really from there, let's go ahead and hear from the community. So Mike, I appreciate you raising your hand. Let's go ahead and unmute Mike Whitney, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. Yeah, I think you kind of captured, the gist of the comments well here. As far as, Lodi Energy Center, there are, certain resources producing their own fuel for storage later. So there's no real model out there like that. And so we're looking forward to working with the CAISO and stakeholders to work on developing a new model. Thank you.
How about that first point, the nonlinear, does that capture?
Yeah, Mike, I appreciate that. So that's definitely the second point of, energy storage when the load is meant to produce and, be used for generation later. But as it relates to, because one of the things that, and again, I wasn't in the session, but, I was able to debrief and I watched the recording. As far as, when we frame up hydrogen electrolyzer participation, it's beyond simply Lodi, right? We want to have a broad application to any kind of new model. So from a load-only perspective, do you have any thoughts or otherwise or confirmation on our capturing of the first bullet here as it relates to the characteristic of kind of nonlinear operation?
Well, as far as, nonlinear, I suppose, what we've been discussing, it's not like a normal bulk energy storage system where the
Correct.
absolute value of the Pmin and Pmax is the same. So, the Pmin, for example, would be 60 and the Pmax would be, somewhere in the range of 300. And then, not all that fuel that was created with that load, it would need additional fuel to hit that Pmax. So it's almost like you'd have to model kind of like a battery within it. So you'd have like a 60 to 60, and then you'd have the 240 on top of it. But the expectation is that it would be, pretty linear and, smooth ramp rate without any kind of forbidden regions or whatnot. So that's at least my understanding of the technology.
Got it. No, I appreciate that, Mike. I think that's a key point for us to characterize appropriately for the problem statement. And so I appreciate you raising that. Any other stakeholders with any thoughts on the two problem statements that you're seeing here in front of you?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised at this time.
Go ahead.
I still have questions, since we have Mike on, about a problem statement related to, because I recall from the conversation we had, there was kind of this idea that there's a desire as, it's a consideration of it as a large load participation first, and then moving into an energy storage. So I'm not sure we're capturing what the problem statement is for if it was before it moves into more of the energy storage type model, if there is a problem statement just specific to the large load participation. And I do recall that there was maybe some constraints into how it could be presented to the market. Not sure.
I guess when the roadmap came out, our initial request was for it to basically qualify as a non-generated resource model. And so that's basically our ultimate goal there that we're kind of pushing for. So it got kind of shifted over to just straight, participating demand, distributed demand or whatnot. So we're just kind of trying to pull it back closer to that NGR type model.
Okay. So Mike, I really appreciate you asking that clarifying question, Jill. So Mike, if I'm hearing you correctly, not only should we maybe take a look at, that last statement of bullet number one, problem statement number one here, of the nonlinear, but is it then fair to say that, it is simply bullet number two that you're seeing as the issue area? And if it were to be standalone electrolyzer use, like maybe not in pairing or in conjunction or for storage, but just, or maybe it's let's say an electrolyzer for pure application of the hydrogen in a completely different sector than energy. So it's not really energy storage. Let's say it's, for fuel cells for a port or something along those lines. Do you see item number one as a current problem statement, or is it really just item number two that you're really kind of hoping to address? And Ben, I see your hand up. I really want to just get this clarification from Mike.
I guess it's there'd be a third bullet, a third problem statement, or maybe modify the second problem statement. But basically, there's certain proposed energy storage facilities that do not fit with current energy storage models. But I guess that's our initial argument, was that it should
Okay.
fit within that model. So I don't know. I guess that's the problem statement, is why can't our facility fit in as an NGR? And that's probably been explained to us, but I think we're still
No, that's
exploring that.
yeah. Jill, go ahead if you had something.
Okay, so in the context of the like an energy storage model, I did hear that he was representing the fact that, you know, there could, the PMIN, PMAX, so there's non-linearity between, you know, the load portion and the gen portion. So that's an issue, I think, that was described a little bit more clear for me in terms of one of the problems with the current energy storage, or NGR. I think there's potentially other problems within the current NGR model, because I think it's non-continuous as well. So I don't think we captured that as a specific issue with this particular type of technology. I think I'm still not clear if there is a desire, because I believe it was brought up in this presentation. Maybe I'm getting it confused with another presentation, but it was brought up. There was still a desire to participate just on the load side for before, you know, going into more of the energy storage side. And if there was a problem with current participation models, I wanted to make sure we're capturing that correctly, which I think we tried to do with the first bullet, right?
Correct.
And maybe the nonlinear is not the right term.
Right, agreed. Yeah.
I think characteristics maybe of this type of large load don't fit into the current.
Okay, yeah, I could definitely see it going in that direction. You know, part of the problem is Tony presented this and he's on vacation now, and when he presented it, I was on vacation then. So trying to maintain a consistent message, but if you're hearing some inconsistencies, that might be why. But I guess, yeah, as far as it acting as a load, are there current load models that allow participating demand to provide, you know, regulation down services or other kind of downward, you know, AS capacity?
Okay, so regulation services.
So,
I think
that's my
there is
understanding is,
under, under our, because when we talk about NGR, you have the dispatchable demand response portion of it, which can, you know, certify under regulation.
Okay.
But under the DDR model, and I thought there was some very specific how this load runs, you know, it may be required to run in, I don't know, for lack of a better word, you said it, chunks.
Blocky load. Yeah, blocky load. Okay. Well, Mike, I really appreciate it. I think for right now, well, I think number one, I think we hear you loud and clear on that last portion.
Yes.
I think that this is also spurring potentially some other areas where maybe we could come back to the working group with additional information to explore just based off of this. So I really appreciate it. And again, I know I didn't mean to put you on the spot, so I appreciate you jumping in. So
No, that's what I'm here for.
I'm going to say, yeah, of course. Ben, let's go ahead and go to you. And you are muted through the WebEx, Ben. Ben Producer, if we could mute Ben, and yeah, there you go.
Hey, Juan, it's Ben. Can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead, sir.
All right. And Ben Producer, if we could keep Mike on here, that actually might be really helpful. I have a couple of kind of directed questions at him, just to help us further flesh out what the thinking is here. I want to start at a very high level. So the way you're talking about the PMIN to the PMAX, and again, maybe the nonlinearities here aren't reflected, or the language here about nonlinearities isn't the right approach. I'm curious first, are you thinking about this as a separate resource, or are you trying to, I know it will be physically co-located, but are you looking for something like a hybrid or a co-located model that would accompany the electrolyzer and the gas resource?
Yeah, that's a
Sorry,
good point. Yeah, it'd probably be more like a hybrid model. You know, you'd have the electrolyzer facilities and then the combined cycle combustion facility, you know, working together. It wouldn't just be one static unit.
okay, because for awareness for the market, a co-located model or just having there be two separate resources would provide us better information. So schedules and the like would make more sense.
Mhm.
But I'm curious in the way you've put this, if you're looking for a hybrid model, meaning that we wouldn't see the resources as individuated, but they would be one.
Correct. Yeah, I
Right.
think
Okay.
what we were initially, you know, envisioning is just fitting both of those separate technologies into the NGR model. So that might be where the disconnect is. It'd be similar to an NGR model, but it'd have two different technologies in it, which is, you know, effectively kind of a hybrid. So we'll have to talk about that more internally.
Okay. And I guess, can you help me better understand why you're looking for a hybrid model and not us, meaning me thinking through this potential new resource type, why you wouldn't want to just represent the electrolyzer as one resource and then the gas resource stays as it is?
I guess we just want it recognized by the market more as a battery and just kind of differentiate it from just standalone load as much as possible.
Okay, and then are you expecting to run this electrolyzer in reverse? Meaning, will you use the electrolyzer to generate electricity, or is the use case in the moment really just create hydrogen, send that to the NG facility?
Yeah, the latter. Yeah, create basically the electrolyzers would consume energy and then we'd store the hydrogen and then feed it into the combustion turbine.
Okay, and then so if you are looking to use the storage resource model, there are other considerations like state of charge. I could rattle off a number of others. I'm curious if you're looking to extend the whole model to the electrolyzer like we do a storage resource where you would have state of charge modeled.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
that
we can
seems very
calculate state of
different.
charge. Mhm.
You would, okay.
Yeah, based off of how much gas is stored.
On top of you calculating a state of charge, the CAISO market also calculates a state of charge, and the state of charge would look different. I think this might be a little bit of a bigger lift than we're initially imagining, because the calculation of the state of charge would be a completely different resource type. So
Yeah, I guess there's all kinds of issues with this data charge calculation for batteries. You know, there's all kinds of fallback and whatnot, and I don't think that would apply to this type of technology. So it might even be cleaner.
okay. And then you were also talking about the ability to provide ancillary services.
Mhm.
Currently, participating load can provide non-spin. It sounds like you're also looking to provide regulation, like question mark?
Yes.
Okay. And then the current storage model has a requirement on the resource, and so the hybrid model might actually work you out of this problem. But if it were just a standalone resource or a co-located resource, there are requirements to bid in upward and downward capacity opposite of the regulation that you're providing. And so this is another consideration the ISO will need to make when it comes to this resource or this resource type, if they're to develop a new model, to figure out how to provide ancillary services in this regard, especially regulation.
Yeah, that's another
So,
reason why yep. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say thank you for these clarifications. Over the last few weeks, I've been thinking this through, and I'm like, you're a weird Venn diagram to fit into the other Venn diagrams of the models out there, and it's like I'm not sure exactly how much to overlap. A, B, and C into what the request is here. So these clarifications have been helpful.
Oh, great. Thank you for asking them and the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
That's it from
and
you,
thank
Juan. Thank you.
Yeah, no, not a problem. I appreciate that conversation. We've been,
Yeah.
go ahead,
I
Jill.
just want to make a clarification and
Yeah.
just, so Ben, because Ben made a comment about load participation and provision of regulation services. He was correct, accurate in stating that the economic DR kind of under PDR is not qualified, wouldn't qualify for regulation. However, under the umbrella NGR model, there is a subsection of just load-only component, and that's, we call it demand, dispatchable demand response, and that could, under that type of resource, qualify for provision of regulation services.
Thanks, Jill.
Yeah.
And then honestly, we were also, well, we were chatting here in the room, and I think that we have potentially a problem statement in bullet number 2 with a little bit of tweaking. I think problem statement number 1, as reflected here, we hear you, Mike. We need to, nonlinear is perhaps not the correct terminology. We'll edit that. But I think I took away maybe the need for us to come back to this working group with, let us do a little bit of kind of internal exploration and maybe come back not only with our findings, but also perhaps a little bit more detail around some of the other demand response models or participating load models that we have, in particular underneath that NGR umbrella, right? And then we can continue the conversation here. This is not to say that I don't want any other opinions. It's just definitely something that we kind of heard as a need or something that would be really beneficial to drive towards a formalized problem statement here, and then we can come back on July 29th. So, Ben, I'm not sure if that's an old hand or a new hand.
Yeah, if I could just make one more comment, sorry.
Please, yeah,
DMM will recommend that we don't take this exact case. If you were to develop a electrolyzer model and then it were to follow the form of a storage resource model, that we make sure that we future-proof this problem and think about electrolyzers in a number of other cases. So as you take this back and do your studies, and you'll get this in our comments, please think about electrolyzers more generally than just this particular use case that we have been developing this problem statement around.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to split it up in that problem statement 1 and problem statement number 2, Ben. So we hear you loud and clear, and we appreciate your thoughts there.
Well, I would ask Ben to kind of look at these problem statements in the lens that he's looking at in terms of a more generalized electrolyzer model, and maybe, you know, if they're not capturing, or if they're capturing it too narrowly, kind of let's pull on that a little bit and get to a more generalized, and then maybe still maintain a more very specific use case problem statement that was presented to us.
Around the storage?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that would be helpful, Ben, if you could help us with that.
Yep, Jill, I hear you. Thank you, I will, and they will show up in the comments. I've been thinking through this, and that's why I was looking for a little bit of clarity on this particular case, but then trying to think more generally about directionally how we do this, because this problem may not show up for another number of years at the ISO. So it'd be nice for us to figure this one out here and now versus pick it up where we're at the moment.
Very good. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate that. Christina, do we have any other hands or anything else in the chat?
I'm not seeing any other questions at this time.
Okay, very good. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, if you don't mind. All right, and so this is reflective, or this is what we heard, right? And our attempt to reflect back, this was Portland General. Their presentation on demand response inclusion into base schedules. And we really, I know I see a couple of EIM participants here in the attendee list. We really heard kind of two things. And so you'll see in bold, we split this up into potential problem statements that are centered more on the application of WIM, demand response programs, on the supply side option, and then another on the demand side option. So the problem statements that you have before you here on the supply side option are that the economic signals for PDR may not align with temperature-dependent DR capacity. And what we mean by that temperature-dependent DR capacity, it was outlined in that last presentation that from a price signal perspective, you may have different system conditions that would actually elevate those prices to a certain point, whereas the geographical region and then the weather, that's what we mean by temperature dependent, would be lower in that area. That's really kind of reducing the amount of reduction that might be capable. So that's what we mean by may not align with temperature dependent DR capacity.
That's what we heard, yeah.
That's what we heard.
Yeah.
So we're looking for confirmation here, stakeholder input to further confirm. We also heard quite a bit around the current LFA or load forecast adjustment. Really, I think it's non-participating demand response.
Oops, I think that bullet should have went under demand side.
Yeah. So let's shift to the demand side.
The performance measurement is on the supply side.
Yeah, so we apologize, and we'll post an updated version here. So if we go to the supply side, we also heard from not only Portland General, but I think several other EIM entities kind of also spoke up in support. Oh, could we go back a slide by chance?
There. Yeah.
There we go. That the current PEM options do not recognize alternative measurement methods that might be used by WIM entities for their performance evaluation. And then on the demand side, and again, I apologize for the flip here, is that the current load forecast adjustment process is somewhat cumbersome, and it does not align with DR program timelines. And what we mean by that is some of the notification periods or other, let's call them runways of notification that might be needed, other intertemporal constraints around WIM entities' demand response programs, that just the load forecast adjustment, it being manual and not an automated process, it does not play well with some of those timelines and the sequencing that is necessary, and that's really more on the demand side. So I'm going to pause there, and I'll reiterate, because the visual is kind of misleading you. I'd love to hear from the EIM community on the economic signals for PDR may not align with temperature-dependent DR capacity, and that the current PEM options are not recognizing alternative methods which an EIM entity may use to evaluate their performance. So let's stick with the supply side option problem statements. Do we have any thoughts? Do you also understand the problem statement the same way that we understood it or presenting it here? Are there any nuances that you would like to kind of expand upon? Let's see, do we have any hands, Christina?
I'm not seeing any hands at the moment. And just a reminder to folks that if you're having trouble raising your hand, that's on the bottom right-hand side of your WebEx screen. And if you're having trouble raising your hand, you can also send in questions via chat as well.
Okay. I'm not seeing any. We are also going to be posting a comments template for this session.
Yeah,
and so we will make sure to reflect this DR inclusion in the base schedule specifically.
Can I just make a comment here?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Some of these problem statements also were surfaced within our PEM discussion.
Correct.
Right? This was, again, it was kind of reiterated within the presentation that we had with the proposed uses of base schedules to represent the DR program. So it's kind of, we've talked about this before, but we just wanted to bring these back up. I think the main the main point was on the current manual adjustment process is cumbersome. So that was kind of really brought to the forefront with the desire to proposed desire to use base schedules to represent. So just wanted to kind of put that out there when we were looking at these.
So I do see a comment in the chat from Helen. I'm going to just read it out loud from you. It says Helen Lowe from SMUD. The only comment I have is that since base schedule is an EIM construct, we need to think along the same lines for EDAM.
Correct. We didn't mention that in
So
here.
that's also a very good point, Helen. I appreciate you raising that.
Because there might be another problem statement that gets introduced because base schedules are currently not part of.
Correct. That's exactly what my head was immediately going towards. Base ETSR turning into mirrors. So
we'll pull that out, and Helen, if you have any suggestions on the problem statements with respect to EDAM, that would be helpful. I think too that though the presentation was more focused on real time.
it was, and I think that between those two, at least from what I saw from the recording, between problem statement number 1 of the temperature dependent DR capacity, and then those timelines of the non-participating DR adjustment to the load forecast. Helen, I would love, as Jill mentioned, for you to provide a little bit of additional color in the comment template as it relates to what you're thinking about with EDAM. I think similarly to, it's fun, when you bring up EDAM, it also triggers something in my head about that load forecast adjustment. So perhaps this is one where we're going to look to the stakeholder community, give us your feedback, and then we can revisit potentially at our next session with a little bit more information. I think inclusive of EDAM is a key point, Helen. So let us come back as the ISO DDEMI team to the community with, let's call it draft 2 of a problem statement, and then we look forward to everybody's feedback.
I think the one thing that we're looking for is maybe a little bit more detail, color, or understanding. We've identified there is the process under the demand side. Seems to hit a lot of the marks, but still isn't hitting all of the marks. And if we've kind of framed it correctly, is there more that that's not doing for WEIM participants in terms of just how they want to represent and use? I think we heard greatly how the base scheduling would work, but we know that there's, we have this one method. Are there some things within the method that there's problems if we fixed could address, and we wouldn't have to look for another option, which that option would be. And I know, Helen, we've kind of gone around this. We're learning. I think we're both kind of learning and then reevaluating how best to enhance. If it's something new, if it's something already in place, and just enhancements to that. Any more information, any more detail would be greatly appreciated.
And I think looking at it through the lens of also taking into consideration, to Helen's point with EDAM, maybe we can take a look at that load forecast adjustment and how that.
And then we'll come back.
Yeah.
And then based on what we hear, and then we can continue the conversation again.
Sounds good. Okay. I want to give a last call for any other thoughts on demand response inclusion in the base schedules for EIM entities as they're drafted. Christina, do we have any comments or hands?
I'm not seeing any comments or questions coming in at this moment.
Okay. All right. Very good. Let's go ahead and let's go to the next slide, if you don't mind. And so then the final, actually before, let's go back one slide real quick, because we did get, I do see a comment. I appreciate you. So this is Helen Lowe for SMUD. Is this problem statement only speaking to the base schedule option? We also advocated for a modified NGR for other EIM, EDAM entities. is that considered as another problem statement? So.
So the problem statement would then kind of pull out from why NGR as a supply side option. What is the problem with utilizing that? So I don't know if we definitely have not captured that, Ellen, here. And if we need to, and potentially we didn't capture it here because I know it came up in the conversation, but it wasn't like very specific to the presentation.
Right, but maybe, you know, since we're talking about it in supply side, I'm curious if it's its own bullet or a sub-bullet underneath that economic signals for PDR may not.
I think it's a different problem statement. If there's a desire in terms of how, you know, that model works from the negative to positive.
So I do see John from Portland General has his hand up. John, we appreciate you. Let's go ahead and unmute John Kitchen, please.
John, you might be double muted. There you go.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Well, we can, John. Thanks for joining us.
Nice. Thanks. Sorry, I had to drop for an issue. I just came back a minute ago. So if I'm understanding this, so the base schedule, I mean, again, just going back to Portland's initial issue is that the baseline methodology just doesn't work and doesn't align for what we need to make them participating. So this proposal for including them in base schedules, are there, like, I mean, I guess just to unpack and better understand that, does that mean that basically like WEIM entities would be able to base schedule any and all of their resources, or is there like restrictions on what gets incorporated in that? And I'm assuming that this base schedule is just indicating it's non-participating, right? So are there limitations to what resources we could include on that? Because today, I mean, basically, you know, we're submitting the load forecast adjustment for a lot of different things, residential thermostats, water heater programs, and various things. So I'm just curious, is this like an all-inclusive thing for WEIM entities, so we no longer have to send that email and we can include all of those resources in this? Because if yes, then that would be, you know, beneficial. But if we still have to follow, you know, multiple processes for different resources, that's kind of what I'm curious about there.
I think the way that we heard it, John, was that you're looking to have all of your programs be able to be considered in base schedules. Were we wrong in that? Or there would always be optionality, but we weren't thinking of it in terms of restrictive base schedules. It just would look like another resource, and you would schedule that. And that would mean that it's deployed, and it's kind of all under your deployment determination once it's base scheduled. I mean, you would be required to deploy it. Yeah. Or there's the anticipation that it's being deployed. But no, we weren't thinking of it in, oh, you could only do it for these type of programs. We were thinking you're asking us to just open that up very broadly to DR programs.
Or that it would be binary in that all demand response would need to be reflected in a base schedule. And I think that's what you're asking, John. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm just kind of asking because like in general, like you guys have requirements in terms of like what you can register and how you register it and stuff. So I'm just kind of curious as to how that is going to look for this. You know, do we go through like a registration process and then that has particular requirements, or is this for WEIM entities? We just like say, hey, you know, we submit a city ticket and say, hey, I want a new DR, right? And I want to be able to base schedule it. That's kind of what I was curious about, is more along the lines of like, what's the policy or the requirements going to be for this to be able to include it, right? So people are actually using it, right? I would assume that you'd have some sort of, you know, limitations or whatever in terms of what it could be used for, but as long as it's open for like all DR programs, I think that that would be beneficial. We would like to see if we could get to the point where we could treat our eligible participating resources, or our eligible resources that would work under a participating model. We would like to be able to get them there. You know, and this is obvious. I think this is a step that we can take without having as much policy changes and like long-term duration, but that's, you know, that's what we would like to see.
No, I appreciate that clarification, John. I think, yeah, we're kind of similar to our PEM problem statements, right? This is why we like to come back to this community and say, this is what we heard. And so I think some clarity around it not being completely inclusive of the DR program, right? There could still be participating resources on the
Right.
WIM&T's DR program.
I think John was moving into more of a solutions kind of.
I agree.
If we open up base schedules, then what does that look like?
Yeah.
Is it just like it is today, or are there some conditions around it? And yeah, we haven't gone to that point yet.
Okay.
I'm happy that you're recognizing there may be, so that's great. But we would have to work through that, you know, if this becomes a proposal that as a policy. I think the one thing that we're still a little bit unclear of, and that was to Helen's comment, we would have to consider this, how that would translate into EDAM, if that's a desire to have these also in the day ahead, because there's nothing right now that mirrors that in EDAM, the base schedules. So you'd have to think through that as well. But as it stands, we're just trying to understand, you know, this desire and why there's a desire to have that, and putting out why from a problem statement standpoint that current options don't work.
Yeah, well, I mean, from my perspective, like on the WEIM&T side, like the existing process is just manual, and it doesn't follow our standard processes that we do for everything else, right? Like we're able to submit all the other information through APIs and whatnot, and get it directly to you guys. And we're not submitting this via email and then waiting for a response, right? Like we're able to just set it up and configure it so we could send you the information. Hey, we're going to do an event during these times. These are their expected megawatts, and then get an immediate response from the application saying, okay, we've seen it, right? Like that's what we do for like our wind forecasts and everything else, right? Like we send you a payload of data saying this is going to be our values for, you know, this is where we're expecting our wind farms to be every 5 minutes. And we get feedback back saying, hey, we received it. That's how our normal processes work. And today with the adjustment, it's an email to a particular group of people, and then we've got to wait for a response back. And then based on the response, we follow different processes. So that's where we would kind of like to see the improvement. Again, we would like to see us be able to get to a point where we can have participating DRs, but I understand that's a longer term thing, and this is just a near term one.
Okay.
I appreciate that, John.
Yeah, and that's what we were trying to kind of, we just talked about program timelines. I think I heard from John, it's not just about, you know, it's cumbersome, but it's not following normal scheduling processes. He had mentioned
Correct.
For all other type of resources.
Yeah.
And there's that desire just to have that consistency across all different types of resources. I don't think we quite captured it.
Yeah, we would like to be able just to include it with our existing systems and processes. And that, you know, those are all pretty much automated now, so.
Very good. John, appreciate that, and we will incorporate some of those clarifications, and I think we'll be coming back to the community the morning of our next session and revisiting some of these. So I do also see we have both Ben and Helen. I think I saw your hand go up and back down. If you want to make a comment, yeah, let's go ahead and go to Ben, and then Helen will go to you.
So I assume you can hear me. This is again Ben from Department of Market Monitoring.
We can
I'm
hear
going
you.
to somewhat foreshadow the next slide that I think is coming. I'm sorry I didn't get to review this beforehand. We're going to talk about real-time bidding. And I'm curious from the WEM entities or the WEM entities, the concept here of improving upon the base schedules. So if you had the ability to bid in real time, and curious if the ISO has the appetite to do this, but what you're looking to do with modifying base schedules is effectively move away from the email. That seems optimal, but then maybe higher value is to bid in those resources into the real time. So you could bid in through a self-schedule, your typical base schedule, but then you could bid in your demand response resources economically. And that would then be the slope in the demand curve or your bids that aren't self-schedules, and then represent those. And I think if the ISO were to pursue the real-time bidding aspect extended to WEM entities, this would then take care of a couple of issues that are being brought up in this problem statement and then could potentially be folded in the next one. I'll pause there for a second.
Yeah, John, would you like to respond to that? Ben, we're kind of chewing on what you just said there. I think I'm understanding the direction you're going, but John, any thoughts?
Yeah, trying to think and unpack that a little bit. So yeah, if we could base schedule, that would solve our problem with the manual process, and it would allow us to use our existing systems, like I said, and which is pretty much automated. And I think that would be a large improvement for us. We would love to be able to see if we can get to the point where we can participate our resources. And again, the reason why we are not today is because of the current issue with the PIMs that we've brought up. And so we could get to the point where we could resolve that issue so we could actually participate or into the market. I think that would be great. We do have, some resources that I know are not going to work with the market very well. Like there's some of them that need 18-hour notification windows, some that have 4, and the 4 would be questionable because the market, as you guys know, is only running 4.5 hours in advance. So if we got a 4.5-hour notice in advance, that would provide us minimal time to inform our customers. And then the market at 4.5 hours is only looking one 15-minute interval into when we're asking that program to run. So it may not really be an optimal decision for the market, right? So like we understand those complexities and we're trying to handle that internally. So we wouldn't be able clearly to bid all of our resources. We recognize that, but we would like to be able to get to the point where we could bid the resources that make sense, and have some sort of flexibility with the PIMs, because again, that's just not going to work, whether it be just we're allowed to do it, or whether it be something like we provide you an SQMD plan and say, hey, these are our resources and this is how we plan on measuring them and providing you that information. So I think, Portland would be open to either option. Understand there needs to be a little rigor and everything there. That's why we were kind of proposing the SQMD like methodology, where we provide you a plan saying this is how we intend on measuring them, and then that gives CAISO the opportunity to weigh in.
Thank you, John. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple other thoughts. I know Helen's here. I'm curious if she has any thoughts, or any of the WEM entities here. I have one other comment to make, but
okay.
John just
Yeah,
brought
go
up
ahead and go to
point.
Helen.
Oh, am I on mute?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you so much. So I think I want to add to both what I'm about to say adds to both what Ben and John just said. I see the space schedule options is the LFA alternative, right? It's the preferable option. I don't think it's either or. The base schedule is the LFA alternative. And then, okay, so we're going to have an LFA alternative for EIM. So my first comment was, okay, we need to think along the same line for the EDAM context. So that was noted. And then it's not either or, I think it's and, right? So in addition to have LFA alternative that works better for us, we would also like to have a PDR alternative where we can bid a program into the market for market optimization, for the optimization value of these programs, which I think is in line with what Ben said. So, and then with that all said, is that I want to make sure that our desire to have a biddable supply side participating model that is a best fit for EIM and EDAM entity is still on the table, either captured in this problem statement or in another problem statement. That is not forgotten. So does that make sense? So I think
Yeah.
it's both. We want both.
Yeah, we're starting to hear that. And maybe we have to put problem statements under all of these different options. And one of them is, you know, problem statement with the LFA, which option, problem statement with the PDR, where we've kind of highlighted the PEM, problem statement with base schedule as being the only option, maybe. I'm just wondering if, Helen, the fact that, because something that was presented under our PEM discussion working group was really about these economic signals, and it seemed to me like there was this kind of thought that no market option would work, but now I'm starting, because the economic signals may not align with the program capacity, but maybe it is very specific to temperature-dependent programs, and there may be other programs that could respond to economic signals. Is that what I'm hearing? And that's why there's the desire to have a more market-integrated, economically dispatched option.
Yes.
And I'd like to hear from John and Helen.
Yeah, so at least one that is viable on the table and an option. And then I want to address John's point that their existing program might not be, you know, but I think even if none of us have programs that can be fully integrated into the market perfectly, by having a participating model that's going to be viable, that works for the market, allow us to have something to work towards in terms of program design and investment in pilots to test certain elements so we have a target. So if we can get it work, we can get it market integrated, because this is what the market expectations are. So
that's where the problem statement is very important. So it would just, you know, there's things around it with PDR, the economic option that's available right now. Is it just the PEMs? Is it just, or, I mean, are there different treatments in the market that's desired? Because again, it was loud and clear that some of the economic signals don't work. So to me, that's being market integrated and economically dispatched.
Right, okay.
And so I'd like to kind of circle around that a little bit more to understand, am I missing another problem statement?
I want to build upon what you said, Joe. I think we have to, when we think about like an alternative, we have to think a little bit more holistically, right? What I think that's what you're trying to say. It's like, for example, when you're talking about PDR and not NGR, because the last time we talked about is, oh, maybe we can modify the NGR to be an alternative, but the NGR integration process is the NRI process, whereas the PDR is the DRRS. And then when it comes to that, we have to examine for EIM and EDAM entities, how that's going to be different. If we were to come up with a modified PDR, that has a different PEM expectation. How's that implicated, how you register it, right? So we should really talking about it holistically. Is that in line with what you're thinking, Joe?
Somewhat, but you've kind of identified processes outside of the market optimization, and I think I'm still trying to determine if there's a problem statement around supply side option with regard to how they are optimized within the market, which is right now a bid and price.
Right, which brings us back to that temperature-dependent DR capacity,
Yeah.
but I think that's, John,
And
why
if
you're.
it's not, that's fine.
Right.
You know, maybe, because I think then the determination is just which programs you decide to bring in
Right.
under economic signal versus those that you don't, that you want a different option for, if the economic signals aren't aligning.
So John and Helen,
Yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, go ahead, John, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, so I was just thinking, so, you know, I think it is a couple of things like you were mentioning, Jill. One is, you know, the PIMS doesn't work for us. The PDR, as you mentioned, I don't know if that model fully covers all DRs, right? Like, how do you include if we have EV or battery storage DRs? Can you model like foldback and other things like what we're talking about on the battery initiative project, right? And is that appropriate to input that into the PDR model, right? Because I mean that's basically an NGR, and so that would add complexity to your PDR model, and also like I don't know if people are caught up or really want to keep the PDR model, because I know that you guys do have a lot of registration, a lot of entities and resources registered as PDR. So I don't know how or if that would change that. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I was kind of proposing, like if you wanted to reassess the PDR model and make changes to it, completely great and open to that. But we are also saying we're also open to, if the PDR model works as it is for what you guys have set up and what's existing, then, you know, do we have the option to create a new model,
Correct.
and or use an NGR type model, right? So that's kind of where I was at with that. And then, yeah, in the participating side of it, you know, I think as we talked about last session, right? Like there's just, especially for Portland, we have drastic weather changes even during the summer. I think that's up to us as an entity for, like, if we have temperature dependent DRs, we bid that accordingly, right? So like if it's a cool summer day for us and we're not going to have, you know, like say residential thermostats aren't going to show up for us, then we wouldn't bid those, or we wouldn't include those. We could include other programs, like we have EVs, batteries, or other things that are not dependent on the weather, right? We could definitely do those like every day, but that's kind of how I would see that. And I do think that we are going to have some, you know, some changes that we need to make from a policy perspective to be able to get more participation, or be able to get our DRs programs to be able to participate in the market. We do have a lot of push from people, from our executives, even the PUC, constantly asking us, hey, are these participating in the market yet? When can we expect to see them participating in the market, right? And so there needs to be a little bit of alignment, like on our executive level, in terms of like what can be participating and understanding there, and as well as how can we, if that's really the goal, is to make all of these participating, how do we shape these programs so they can work in the market? And so the way that I see it, like if we go down the path of doing the base schedule, I think that would be great. That would solve a lot of our problems up until we get to the point of EDAM, but it doesn't solve the problem of the desire to have participating DRs for us. And then once we get to EDAM, you know, how is that going to work? So even if we did get to the point where we could participate our DRs, I don't think all of them would fit in that participating model. And I don't understand enough about EDAM yet, if an 18-hour notification program would still be a viable option, right? Because the day-ahead market could call it and say it needs it, but then I guess maybe it would be viable there, because then maybe once the day-ahead market says it's going to be used, then it just forces the real-time market to use it. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to function.
Any comments?
Yeah, we could get into a little bit more education on how PDR is treated between, and how you're able to set up your PDR resources for day-ahead scheduling or day-ahead dispatch and which rolls into more of a schedule. So it does give you those. I thought, you know, with EDAM, PDR does provide you with a much longer notification,
Right.
event kind of notification for your program. So we can get into that a little bit more. I think the base schedule is something that's not mirrored in EDAM, but PDR definitely is mirrored in EDAM. We haven't really dug deep into what that would look like within EDAM, and that's something we can do
Absolutely.
later on. Yeah, I think I'm hearing the desire to have multiple options.
Correct.
In these different areas. And yeah, I think we've somewhat captured. There might be some more capturing that we have to do with it.
I agree. I agree entirely. So what I'm hearing, and Johnny and Helen, let me know if I'm on the right track, and then we'll move on to the next theme, because I think we'll definitely need to come back, right? Take a look at the top problem statement here around PDR. The problem statement is that I think temperature-dependent DR capacity is something for consideration, but John, I heard you loud and clear, that's something that you would internalize, right, in your own bidding behavior for it. So we would need to rework this PDR problem statement. The current manual load forecast adjustment process, when we say does not align with DR program timelines, I think that's more of some of those timelines and processes that the EIM entities have on their own end, and we would sincerely appreciate a little bit more information on those, so we could take those into consideration as we redo problem statement number 2 that you see there. I think we're in line with the PEM problem statement, and what I'm hearing really loud and clear is that NGR desire is more of an alternative model. If the base schedule is an alternative to load forecast adjustment, the NGR, WIM NGR, and it could end up being, you know, something we solve with an alternative PDR, right? But either way, participating, non-participating as the LFA adjustment, and then PEMS. If we were to take, through what I just said, if we were to take that back and kind of work internally here on revamping these problem statements and maybe giving a little bit more information on this discussion, does that feel like I'm tracking with you guys?
I think so. But I would add one more thing. I'm wondering, does it make sense having the LFA alternative, which is base schedule discussions, as one problem statement, and then have a biddable market participating PDR alternative or NGR alternative for behind the meter program as another problem statement, just to kind of keep those conversations a little bit more distinct and not at risk of mixing and matching.
I think you did a better job of verbalizing it than I did, but I'm going the same direction as you, Helen. Yep.
All
right, thank
Appreciate
you.
that.
Yeah, and I would see the base schedule option as like just a temporary one, because that's obviously not going to work for us next year when we go live with EDAM. But yeah, I agree. And like I said, you know, again, just for clarity, like I don't think PGE cares per se whether we have a PDR, NGR, whatever model we want to call it, as long as we can get to the point where we have a model that will work for people. Whether it's we redo PDRs in a way that, you know, change the model structure of it or whatever we need to that works, or maybe even educate people in terms of maybe we just don't entirely understand what it can be used for. But yeah, I'm not trying to say that we need another model per se. Like I was just trying to avoid any sort of conflict. So we're open to basically just coming up with something that works, right? Like how can we implement a resource, a DR resource, and make it a participating model, knowing that the PIMS issue that we have. Can we do that with PDR? If we can, then great. But that was our concern, is maybe we didn't want to touch the PDR model because it already has structure to it. But we're open to that. At the end of the day, we just want to be able to have something that works. again, don't care if it's a new model, don't care if it's, we set up PDR differently, open to either way.
Understood. I appreciate it, John. Thank you very much, and great conversation. Exactly what we're hoping for in a working group, so thank you very much for all the comments and conversation there.
Ben, I think.
Ben, is that an old hand?
Yeah, if I could make one more comment, but hopefully this is a segue into the next one. I really
Sure.
appreciate what just happened. And the one question we have at the market monitoring department is that if you're looking, it's unclear if you're looking for new PEMs or if you're trying to effectively create your own PEMs and then bring those to the ISO and actuate them through EDAM, WAM. This is where I want to segue into the next slide, I think. Through real-time bidding, you can have your own PEM, reflect those into the market through your bidding, and we don't have to think about any of your performance. That's up to you as your own BA. I also understand that you're looking to have your demand response resources in the market, basically because you're simultaneously looking through monitoring, verification, and assessment, MVNA. And so it seems that the WAM entities, or at least the two that have spoken up, would love to hear from more. If you're part of why you want to be in the market as a resource is because you want that MVNA aspect. And so there's a trade-off there that I think would be worth us as stakeholders thinking through. I hope that makes sense.
That does, Ben.
Happy to.
I appreciate it. John, any response there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was not under the impression that we were allowed to, as it stands today, that we were able to create a resource using our own methodology. So like
you do through your load adjustments.
Yeah, doing the load adjustment, not the PDR.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at is like if we had a resource that was registered with CAISO, how can we make that a participating resource, knowing the whole thing with PEMs? So or are you saying that you would make that register that as a load resource?
Yeah, the general question of if you can adjust your load, you have a DR resource there, that's load, and then you change your load, going to the next slide, this is the segue. If you can change your load through real-time bidding and say that we know we have a DR resource showing up in the real time to lower our load, the ISO wouldn't think, well, I'm not going to speak for the ISO, but the ISO would take that as is because you've rebid your load and would take that seriously. And then if it's due to a DR resource, it would be up to your own PEM to decide whether that resource performed or not. And from the ISO's perspective, if that resource didn't perform, there would be a number of implications there. You suppose it's a large one and you failed the RSE, like the resource sufficiency evaluation, there would be the implications here in the ISO. But the ISO would not be providing a PEM. The ISO would just be providing a platform to make those differences in the real time for energy transfers. So the PEM would be yours, the program would be yours, but you wouldn't be following the various PEMs that are here in the ISO.
Okay, that's interesting. I
think-
guess we never looked at creating it as a biddable load.
And that's,
Yeah, that's why I want to segue into the next slide, because I think there's a lot of overlap between this and the proposal by CDWR, or California Department of Water Resources.
agreed, and we took that conversation as our opportunity to go ahead and transition to that next slide. And I think another key clarification is, what Ben's describing is, in the last slide we had supply side options, demand side options. I think what Ben's describing is definitively on the demand side. So that's another kind of key consideration, John, as we kind of move into this conversation. But I do follow where Ben's going, so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts as we kind of move forward into these next two problem statements. So great conversation. I really appreciate that kind of organic back and forth.
Can I make one clarification?
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Between what Ben was alluding to and what we're talking about here about a participating load and it kind of, or demand side bidding in general. If you were to take load, a certain subset of your overall demand and bring it into the market, yes, you could bid that day ahead, real time, but it's the load that would be, all of the load that would be participating in your program. And then you'd have to take that out of your normal demand forecast. This is, you know, you'd have to carve that out right now as it stands to be able to do the demand side bidding. Now, if you want to bring it all in together and bring it all in together and do full demand side bidding with the portion of your programs represented as biddable quantities within an economic bidding structure, you know, there's limitations today on demand side bidding. It's something that's done in the day ahead, but not in real time. So Ben, I just wanted to make sure, I know what we're talking about in an expansion is what you were talking about and referring to was an expansion of demand side bidding into the real time. And I would agree that at that point, we're just looking at overall load values, and you don't have to separate out, you know, how the performance of those programs, because you're measuring it, you know, based on all of the measured load or the measured demand. But it would be an expansion of what's available today.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jill, and that clarification. What I'm saying is that these problem statements, I think, overlap pretty severely, and it would be nice to get to this one and then think about it in the WEM context, because it would be nice for the WEM entities or the WEM entities to have their own autonomy. And so for us to get to this bidding aspect of things and then better understand what the ISO's appetite is for this would be worthwhile, because we might be able to do away with a lot of the conversation we had previously with where we could potentially go in the real-time bidding component if they were to move simultaneously.
Okay.
Appreciate that, Ben. Okay, no, very good. And TJ, I see you're on, so hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm not doing it right now, but forewarning, I will be calling on you here, sir. So as far as the participating load modifications that we heard from our last session, we have the two problem statements that you see here before you. So participating load resources cannot submit energy bids into the real-time market to decrease or increase consumption, and this does not allow full participation due to the constraints imposed by our current participating load models and wholesale demand response market. As a separate problem statement, you know, again, what we've heard, and we're seeking confirmation here, is that allowing participating loads full participation to bid energy and respond to real-time market signals without limiting it to DR events would allow it to better respond with greater system flexibility, or providing greater system flexibility by shifting demand and additional slope to the demand curve. So this is, you know, again, what the ISO heard, and we're seeking confirmation, thoughts, et cetera. Ben, I see that your hand stayed up. I know you wanted to chat about this, but if you don't mind, I'd like to go to TJ first. TJ, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand, and just at the very, yeah, go ahead. Let's go ahead and unmute TJ, letting us know if you feel like we've captured your problem statements correctly from the conversation that happened on the 17th, and if there's any additional color or nuance you would like to add.
Yeah, so just from the conversation on the 17th, I think when that was initially drafted, that we weren't sure how, well, first of all, we weren't sure if this was just limited to decreasing energy. I think we provided some feedback that, you know, we would like to be able to increase energy. We weren't sure if that was part of the splitting of the problem statements to demand side bidding a little bit later. Also, we weren't unsure of was it just limited to DR events, and the feedback that we provided, I think, well reflects on what we internally talked about. So I think this is a good representation of what we are looking for, and we appreciate you guys listening to our suggestions, and are very interested and engaging about how this can have broader implications as we see the excitement from Ben on these discussions. So thank you.
I appreciate that, TJ. And Ben, since you, I have one question of my own, but you beat me to it. You raised that you have a couple of points. Let's go ahead and go to you.
I would like to hear this conversation further. I think that there's this overlap between base schedules and how we incorporate the WAM entities and real-time bidding. And I think that there's a lot of breadth and depth there that would be nice to hear from the stakeholders. And this will at the very least come out in my comments.
Very good. I appreciate you, Ben. So TJ, maybe one of the items, if you could help me understand, and I think maybe the rest of the community, in particular, in light of Ben's comments of the potential for this applying in a broader context, would you mind expanding on without limiting it to DR events for me?
Oh yeah, so that's a good point. I think right now the way that we operate is that we provide non-spin bids in the day ahead, and we flag them. We flag them for EAA events, and so what we want to do is that we want to be able to respond with energy bids, just as supply increasing or decreasing load normally as you would just bid in energy in the market. So does that make sense?
It definitely does. Thank you. That helps me. And then I think my other, we talked a little bit about linearity on the electrolyzers. Admittedly, we might need to come back to that and make an edit, but I was curious, are there any constraints or to what, how do you view, I guess, the range of participation and the range of that flexibility when you say greater system flexibility by shifting demand? Is there anything that we should be mindful of?
I think that's a conversation that I'll have to have internally, because I'm not necessarily the expert on, how we manage the system. But I think, from the review that we've had internally, we do have some good flexibility within our system that varies on a seasonal basis. So, and also just kind of mentioning on without limiting to DR events, I think that what we really want to do is free up load to respond to real-time price signals without kind of limitations to just, the responding to emergency events.
Got it. Okay, go ahead, Jill.
I think I want to ask a little bit more, but would you still want to maintain the optionality to limit it to DR events based on your inflexibility during certain periods of time?
Yeah, so that seasonality, right? I'm sorry, TJ, go ahead.
I said I believe so, yes.
Okay.
I don't think we identified.
No, that's definitely something that we need to come back and make an edit to that problem statement then.
Yeah.
Okay. TJ, I appreciate it. Jill, any other comments? So
yeah,
let's turn it to the community.
Just
oh yeah, go ahead, TJ.
So the thing is that we don't want to undervalue our ability to be able to provide RA. So the option of offering non-spin with the flagged events is still pretty important to us.
Got it. So it's an and, not nor,
Yes.
right? So,
Yes.
okay, understood. Thank you. And I think we could do a little bit of work on wordsmithing to make sure that we reflect that.
Wait, he
Like,
kinda
I
has
think,
got a
I
question.
think,
Go for it.
sorry,
No, this
Jill,
is
I
a
think like what,
conversation.
I think
I need to,
where we
I need
presented
to,
in, oh, sorry,
Okay.
sorry, Jill.
TJ, just back to that just the comment that you just made about RA. Can you clarify that?
So I think that this is a conversation point that we need to have, because right now I think a lot of what we offer is that non-spin, which gives us value in RA, but we have some flex, we're minimally dispatched. And so what we're trying to do is we want to be able to find the right balance. You know what I mean? There's the possibility of us to be able to shift load more regularly to be able to respond to price signals, but right now we're really heavy on the capacity side, and I think that we want to find the right point of flexibility to be able to offer to the system.
Okay, great.
I appreciate that,
Can I
TJ.
ask a quick question, please?
Yeah.
This is Ben with
yeah.
DMM.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you have supply-side DR with your participating load already?
Oh, sorry, Ben, there was a little question broke up. You said, do we provide what with our main
This
response?
is wrapped into this kind of supply side question, or this like bidding in the real-time markets. What is the relationship between RA and bidding in real time?
So for RA right now, we provide it to, like, RA is required for our resources. And so we provide it to cover for our resources, and we also offer it into the market to be able to be sold on non-spin if needed be under an emergency event. Does that answer your question? So we use it to cover some of our own obligations.
So the 550 megawatts that was presented last meeting,
Yeah.
are any of those on the supply side of your RA obligation?
I think I'd have to come back and respond to that in writing, but I know for the non-spin capacity, it's provided under the current participating load agreement model to do load drops.
Okay. So non-spin, you can correct me if your LRA is taking this differently, but what you have with non-spin is different than being an RA resource in your year ahead and month ahead showings.
I think what we offer varies based upon our full RA obligation. So that the number that we provide to the market does reflect current conditions. So we're not fully offering all of our RA.
Okay, so in what you presented last meeting, the non-spin and the RA aren't the same thing, because that's how I heard what you were saying earlier.
Non-spin.
This is Ansel Lundberg from
Yes, they're separate. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, I think there might be a link here. I have to confirm this, but I believe that the non-spin offer fulfills the must offer obligation for participating load as an RA resource. So I think there's a connection here between the two. But as far as, I think, Ben, you're asking about the amount of capacity and the relationship between shown RA. Okay.
So the full RA offering is greater than what I showed in the graph. And they're separate things.
Okay. Yeah, because this begs the question, if we then have load show up in the real time to rebid, then we're
Mhm.
really close to effectively what PDR is doing. And so if we have these resources that are on the load side that are providing effectively what PDR is doing, then how do we think about those resources as an RA resource?
They can meet
That's-
their
yeah.
obligation, just like as an RA resource if they bid into the day ahead and are available in the real time.
I think in the real time, it's an energy bid, right? So,
Right.
Yeah.
You can set it up, you know, it does allow for day ahead bidding.
and I think one of the items that we talked about, so Ben, when you bring up the linkage to PDR, we talked earlier about maybe coming back to the working group and presenting how you could set up a PDR today ahead to Helen's point about EDAM.
Right.
So I think this is maybe another opportunity to come back with.
But Ben, from a PDR, I'm not quite sure what the question is. I see where you were going. It starts to look more, what they're asking, if you move into a more dynamic economic participation, both in the day ahead and the real time. But what my earlier question was, maybe they don't want to do that all the time.
Right.
And so there's some optionality that they're looking for under a participating load
So
model.
Jill, that is correct. We want some optionality to it, and I think, you know, moving into a real-time load bidding is a transitional piece, and I think it's like I mentioned earlier that like based upon market conditions and the ability for us to how this pans out financially, we have to find that right option, and just fully stepping into the real-time load bidding world without being able to offer non-spin with the flag contingency would have to be something, you know, that we have to figure that out over time.
Yeah. And the one thing that I was trying to tease out as well, based on Ben's kind of comments, do these loads often can meet their obligation through the non-spin, but there might be more flexibility or even more capacity that they could offer in the day ahead, in the real time above their RA obligation?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. I think that's the piece that is, and that just gets to more flexibility in utilization of capacity in the real time.
Thank you. John, I see your hand. I also see, just really quick, I see your comments
Oh,
in the
and Jill,
chat.
just to clarify, that portion that we have more to offer is in real time is as energy.
As energy, right.
Right,
Which you can mean.
which goes
yeah.
to the moon.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, TJ. I appreciate that. Mr. Kitchen, let's go ahead and unmute John Kitchen. I do see your comments, so, you know, we talked about, I think, hearing loud and clear that we might need to come back with a little bit more information, so a comparison matrix of options with the key differences. I think that'd be a great visualization and something we can come back to the next working group with. But let's go ahead and go to you, sir.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, I think that this is potentially a good idea, but for the participating load option, you know, it's only a day ahead thing now, as you guys mentioned, so I am not really all that familiar with it, and I think we'd have to kind of unpack it some more. I would have to read into it a little bit more and understand it before I can like more accurately say whether or not I think this is a good idea. It sounds like it might be a good option. I think it would be great if, you know, we could, and you already called it out, I commented on here, but I think it'd be great if we could just have like a comparison of what are the actual options, like just do a matrix of these are all the different ideas that we have, or the different options that we think would work, and kind of outline the key differences or the pros and cons for each one. I think that would be maybe be highly beneficial as well. as we, as we think through these.
Is that, John, quick kind of procedural question, is that inclusive of the proposals or just to understand what is currently
I think he's saying
offered?
current.
Okay.
I think both, right? Like what do we currently have available to us? I think it sounds like there may be some misunderstandings there, right? So like what's the current state? And then also what are these proposals, like the participating load, expanding that to real-time market? What would that look like? Right? Like what does that give us that, something like a PDR or something else like that doesn't, right? I think that would be kind of nice to be able to see and understand.
Appreciate that feedback, John. We'll definitely take that item back. Very good. I see TJ. Christina, do we have any other comments or hands?
I'm not seeing any new hands. TJ, is that an old hand of yours, or did you raise
yes,
your
it
hand
is.
again?
Sorry, took it down.
Oh, again, great conversation. I think we need to come back and we'll likely be able to get to kind of a formal problem statement on all these. So I really appreciate everybody's engagement in all three of those problem statement formation exercises. Let's go ahead, keeping an eye on time. I never want to cut a conversation short, especially one that good, but we do need to move forward here. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And I'm going to hand this over to Jill Powers.
Well, yeah, this is kind of our transition into today's topic, which is topics on our reliability-based demand response. And as we've done in the past, as we introduce new topics, we try to provide a little bit of level setting, a little bit of education for those that may not be as familiar with this product or this offering, which was, developed to enable emergency responsive demand response in the market and for it to participate. So let's go to the next. So I threw together some slides. We can go to the next slide to give you some background and background information as we walk into these presentations. And there's some terminology you may hear. There's some options under this and some very specific characteristics of this product that you might not be familiar with and that you might hear in these presentations. So spending not a lot of time, but a little bit of time, because you can do a whole day of education in this area. So we'll just move forward. Ansel did very high level talk about RDRR when we were looking at the different participation models. This is the one that is our reliability demand response, but it does have an economic component to it. It's able to participate in the day-ahead market, so that's an option, very specifically economic participation. But then you're also able to participate in the real-time market. And this statement, offer uncommitted capacity and respond to reliability event for the delivery of reliability energy in the real time, because there is a much different treatment of it for those different treatment of bids into the real-time market. So there could be an economic scheduling of it from the day ahead. If there's additional capacity, kind of similar to what we just talked about from a RE standpoint, if you have more capacity, well, you could come in this particular product, you could come in with more real-time bids with this additional capacity, but kind of label as reliability energy in real time, and it's treated slightly different. There are some restrictions when we develop this product because of its very unique nature and treatment of day ahead as well as in real time. There are a couple restrictions, constraints. They're not able to submit RUC availability or ancillary services bids, and they can't provide, this mechanism cannot be utilized to self-provide ancillary services. If we go to the next slide, getting a little bit more about the characteristics of this resource. It can bid in 10 kilowatt increments like PDR, like other resources. The minimum load curtailment is about 0.5 megawatt. Again, can't participate in the ancillary services. It has aggregation rules, so aggregated loads can be done. It can use smaller loads to aggregate to meet those minimum requirements. Reliability demand response does not have a telemetry requirement, and it does not have a telemetry requirement at any size. And so I throw that out there because you're going to hear, I think, about size limitations that we have. And if we go to the next characteristic, go to the next slide, it will talk about some of those other limitations. So there are some requirements for its startup. So it has to reach full curtailment within 40 minutes, particularly in real time, because of the way it's treated in real time. It can elect to receive discrete dispatches if it's participating real time only, and discrete dispatching means it's blocky. It's in chunk. It's like a take all or nothing, cannot be marginally dispatched. So that is somewhat why we have these size limitations of 100 megawatts. The telemetry plays a role in it as well. But if you decide to go with discrete dispatching, you can't participate in the day-ahead market because we don't have that capability in the day-ahead market to do the discrete dispatching. There is a restriction on the minimum on time or minimum run time. Those terms are always used interchangeably. And right now, there's that minimum on time cannot be greater than 1 hour. It also has a requirement that these have to have a sustained response period of at least 4 hours. If we go to the next one, I think I get maybe one more characteristic. No, okay, participation expectations. They're not required to participate economically, so you don't have to put in day-ahead market participation. It's option, but then as mentioned, to be able to participate in day-ahead, you can't be discretely dispatched. We talked about offering energy in the real-time market. One of the restrictions, because there's an actual cyber rule that looks at bids, and the energy that is bid into the real-time market has to be, in this case it says 950 to 1,000 megawatts. It's really, the logic is 95 to 100% of the price cap. And in real time, those bids are used only for reliability only purposes. So we'll talk about some mechanisms of when they're enabled into the market. That has to be at a period of time where there's some emergency alerts. RDRR resources are required to register in the master file with a PMIN value of 0 megawatts, and that was based on programmatic structures. There's underlying reliability demand response programs to these resources. So there's really no concept of what a PMIN value is. In addition, because of the PMIN, the minimum load cost was set at 0. So these are requirements and constraints within the master file. We go to the next slide. Okay, a little bit of background about RDRR treatment in the real-time market. As mentioned, for those real-time bids, they're kind of held back, and then operators make the decision to enable those bids into the market for optimal market dispatch within the real-time market, or there is an optionality, because again, these are reliability resources, to force them, and to force them, under these conditions that deemed necessary through an exceptional dispatch. Now, pointing out some of the background, the initial design only accommodated bin enablement into the real-time dispatch process. So that was all that was available, and for reasons, the original policy just had this enablement happening in the real-time dispatch. And that dispatch process had an advisory horizon extending about 65 minutes. So that was maybe one of the considerations of why there was these tighter restrictions in the startup and minimum on time. Go to the next one for background, additional background. But there's been changes through the years since the initial 2014, and it was when we developed this policy. And for some examples, I wanted to throw out in 2021, we had an initiative. We got FERC approval for allowing these to be not just in the real-time dispatch, but to be enabled in the real-time pre-dispatch. And that allowed the resource to be considered over a longer horizon in the optimization. So when this kind of occurred, there was a thought, well, we have some more flexibility on what the resource minimum on time could be, but there's still limitations in terms of that horizon and what we would want to maintain because these are discrete, they could be very large. We don't want them running, for too long because they may not be needed. So we will, so that's just a consideration as we're thinking about new changes, new enhancements. Again, in 2022, we went back to FERC, we got approval for some issues that we are seeing in terms of how they were dispatched and how they needed to operate. So a lot of these enhancements were, again, looking at their operationally, how do they really operate? And how do we want them to operate in an economic decision-making process? From an exceptional dispatch process, that we can operate them pretty forcibly and utilize them. And so for many years, that's what we were doing. But we wanted to enhance their capabilities within an economic decision-making and from a price formation standpoint and allowing for this to happen more within the market. So had some more enhancements. One was a re-rating the P-min of these discretely dispatched RDRRs to below the upper economic limit and input of default minimum load cost when we did that. And that was to keep it into a continuous dispatch. Without this, we are seeing dispatches every 5 minutes up and down because it has that P-min of 0. Won't get into it too much. At the end of the presentation today, there's some additional links that you can get into the policy development that speaks to these in much more detail as to the problem that it solved. But this was one thing that was done. In addition, in that 2022 enhancement, we raised the RDR cap from 50 megawatts to 100 megawatts. But there was also these conditions that were set, and these conditions are within the tariff. There's tariff language. It says, okay, we'll allow for it to be 100 megawatts, but we'll kind of let you go above 100 megawatts, but you have to meet these conditions. And these conditions were not separate conditions. If you could see, the language says and. So you had to meet all the conditions. And I think you'll hear some within the material presentations or with some of our stakeholders, they'll speak to, I think this is going to come up in some of the topic areas. One more on background, I believe. Next slide.
We do have a comment in the chat.
Okay.
I'm not sure if we need to take it back, but how common is it for market energy prices to exceed 95% of the big cap through RTPD dispatch rise?
Not very much. But there are times, and I would probably look to Ben because he's probably seen it more often in terms of this past summers, probably not too much this past summer where these were enabled, because remember, this is like an enablement decision into the market. Even if the prices did exceed that, if they're not enabled under certain reliability conditions that are existing, they still wouldn't be dispatched because those bids are held back. But we don't see it very, very often, but we can get that information.
Yeah,
I just don't have it handy.
Right.
And we're looking at it on a summer basis, so we'll probably have up-to-date information from this past summer 2024.
Correct. And Daniel, would you mind sharing who you're with, just your
I know
affiliation?
Dan, he's with the California Public Utilities.
Oh, okay, very good.
But we can get that.
But we'll take that as something that we'll come back to the working group with. Appreciate the question.
Okay, so again, I kept like running through, what else did we do? What else did we do that has an impact, that's kind of being discussed in today's topics. And another thing, I think we got this, enabled them in RTPD. I don't know, maybe I made these slides. And then, okay, next slide. I don't know if I have some extra slides. Okay, another FERC approval, we wanted to make sure that the bidding rules aligned with what was established through FERC Order 831, and this is when our bid caps increased. When we originally had the bid caps, it was at 1,000, but there are conditions that exist where there can be a request and an approval of increases to our energy soft bid cap, and that could go up to as high as 2,000 megawatt hours. So we still wanted to maintain the 95 to 100% bid requirement, which is, it's a cyber bidding rule. But what we did, if the cap went up, because what we would see would be the bids to the 1,000 cap, we would automatically change it to 95 to 100% based on that original bid, if it was 95 or up to 100%. Automatically adjust those RDR bids based on the new price cap in real time, so that it would maintain the percentage of the bid cap originally submitted by the scheduling coordinator. So what this basically did is always put those bids higher, high in the stack. And it didn't keep it at the 95 to 100% of the 1,000, but actually moved them to the higher bid cap up to the 2,000 bid cap, if that was, and maintaining its order at the very high level. And then the last one, and I think you'll hear about this, there was a change where we extended some dispatch options to RDRRs, and that was allowing them from just being 5-minute dispatchable to either 15-minute dispatchable or 60-minute dispatchable. And this kind of was, again, trying to move this to how it operates, how these resources, characterizing these closer to how it operates. And that means it will get dispatched either 5-minute movement up and up to its, its bid quantity and down to its PMIN, or in 15 minutes it would hold it for that full 15 minutes, or in a 60-minute dispatchable it holds it for that full 60-minute. So RDRRs registered at 15 minutes, it can set the marginal price in those 15-minute markets, and 60-minute dispatchable RDRRs, however, cannot, because we're holding those, and those prices can change throughout that hourly scheduling time. So it would receive 15-minute interval dispatches that were contiguous, that they would all be the same, and so it would basically be maintaining it at that dispatch level for an hour. So a lot of changes, a lot of them are still being kind of utilized, but still you might see some of the problem statements and some of the issues related to even those enhancements. If we go to the next one. Next slide. So I just wanted to throw out that some of what's coming in terms of the topics, it does require tariff changes. So in the case of the RDRR minimum on time, it's very specific in our tariff that this is a requirement. Go to the next slide. Again, this is the requirement on RDRR, startup costs always being at zero value. So this is the tariff section that represents it. This is H basically lays out startup bid for reliability demand response resource shall be 0. So that would require a tariff change if we were to make changes to that. And then next slide. Hopefully I'm staying within my time frame.
You're doing well.
Again, I think this may be a little bit of a repeat as to what I said. RDRRs registered as a discrete dispatch option are dispatched at or near their maximum economic bid quantity over their minimum time. So we would always look at that minimum time and we would maintain it at that maximum bid quantity or near, based on that re-rate option that we have or that we instituted. RDRRs registered as non-discrete, and we also call them continuous. They can be dispatched between their P-min of 0 and their maximum economic bid quantity over the minimum on time. But if they're chose those 60-minute or their 15-minute, it will be maintained over that 60-minute time frame or the 15-minute time frame. So you might hear a little bit about non-discrete, and as you recall, if you are bidding in some of these programs into the day-ahead market, because those programs have that capability, they would be considered non-discrete. There is like a restriction on them. They must be non-discrete. Okay, next slide. And one last treatment, market treatment, because we really looked at this in terms of now how is RTPD optimizing these resources that are enabled into the market with the real-time bids, and how are they using their startup time and the minimum on time. So they are economically evaluated based on that real-time bid, quantity, and price. If it's economic in that RTPD time horizon, it will be dispatched. Once dispatched, it will be kept on in the remaining intervals respecting, even though the prices may change within a 15-minute, 5-minute interval, it's gonna respect it and keep it on for that full minimum on time. So there is some consideration of that minimum on time because it's looking forward, it's looking out, it's estimating what those prices are going to be, and it's making decisions on whether or not to start that unit up and to maintain it on the minimum on time. And it's that optimization of others that may be more economic during that horizon. And so, again, we're talking about RTPD horizon. We have a 1-hour minimum on time right now. So longer on time may be considered because it's RTPD time horizon. If we go to the next slide, I think I lay out the RTPD time horizon is a little bit more than an hour. But you can see that the RTD was smaller. And RDRR right now, the startup minimum time can kind of go out a little bit more. Right now, it's a little bit more restricted than what the RTPD time horizon is. Okay. And I'll let you guys digest that on your own. Next slide. So, again, these economic decisions, and again, I'm only bringing this up because we're going to be talking about it. Economic startup decisions for discrete RDRR, once it's enabled into the market, considers the impact of the total cost over that RTPD time horizon. So we ran, if we were to run scenarios, if you looked at all the intervals and no intervals were economic based on that quantity price, in their minimum on time and that whole period, it wouldn't be startup. If there was one interval that looked economic, it still wouldn't be started up. It requires that all intervals in that, in terms of the LMP is economic. So all of that real-time RTPD time horizon would have to be economic for that to be considered for startup and to be dispatched over that full minimum on time. So the minimum on time, the other comment here is, okay, this is how it would be considered and how, what would limit it. It would be limited in terms of it being dispatched unless all of it was economic over that period of time. If it's dispatched, the minimum on time is respected. So it's just making the statement, it's respected in both the economic evaluation, and once it's dispatched, it's respected over that period of time. And then I think one last comment. Next slide. If the operators were to utilize this optional force dispatch in real time, it's done through an exceptional dispatch. Once that's done, RDRR, those resources will be kept at its PMAX re-rate, which just above it, maybe a slight over their PMAX, over its entire minimum on time. And even if there's kind of this condition where the operators are saying, okay, I dispatched this, and I forced this on, but then I unforce it because I don't necessarily need it anymore. Again, this is a reliability resource. It's kind of a mechanic mechanism they use to unforce it. It will still remain dispatched over its minimum on time. So just the act of them unforcing it or enabling it, it's still the market will see that it's on, and then it will respect its minimum on time. So those are some of the things I wanted to present, and I think that's it for me.
Let's go to the next slide. I think so.
And I can answer any questions related to that, although we're not going to get into too much depth. And there is material in the appendix of this presentation that maybe you can dig a little bit deeper and get some of your questions answered as well. But
we do have one question in the chat. So technical question regarding the fixed dispatch cost proposal that we will be hearing about shortly. Can CAISO staff say whether the current CAISO tariff defines eligible, reasonable startup costs in a way that would be applicable to load shed resources like RDRRs?
Does not. Okay. It was not contemplated in the discussion of and development of this product. It may have been discussed, but there was never any determination of what that could be. Now, there may be some discussion about economic demand response under PDR, which are able to submit for some of those costs. But it's something, again, I'd have to, and it would not be in the tariff, it would be in the BPMs.
Okay.
But when you say applicable to load shed resources like RDRRs, there's really nothing like RDRRs in terms of just, the definition of the startup costs. But there is for generators, there are for economic PDR, and there is a process in which it, is evaluated and determined.
Yeah.
If it's applicable.
So that was Daniel Aranta. Hopefully that answered your question, Daniel. Let's go ahead and...
Can you go up a little bit to see what Ben responded to something?
Sure.
It said RDRR was not dispatched last summer. It was dispatched economically, I think, in the day ahead, but that would have been day ahead, but not for reliability purposes. So again, as mentioned, RDRR, and there are some programs that do come into the day-ahead market with bids, and those were dispatched. Yeah.
So in our agenda, we have a little bit of time allotted towards some problem statement discussion here. We're likely going to eat up on that. We had some really good conversation on, enhancing demand flexibility. I didn't want to cut short. So I think from here, let's go ahead and let's move on to the next slide. And then we're also joined by Sam Harper. Sam, I apologize for the formatting. It apparently took over your title slide. That's on me. But Sam is from the representing the California Large Energy Consumers Association. And Sam, we'll go ahead and give the floor to you to go over some of your problem statements that are kind of a continuation of the roadmap submissions from the 2024 process. So Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
You can.
Excellent. Maybe just as a preface, so a lot of this is building on some great work that CAISO did at the end of 2023 and early 2024 with the white paper on this related issues. And then, Juan, this was submitted in the catalog process last year. But I'll admit it's very complicated. So if I say something wrong, please be kind. And even as Jill was going through her presentation, I had a few questions. So I'll go through this, and I think it'll be a good discussion. You want to go to the next slide, please? So what I thought I'd do today is go through CLECA members just to give an idea of when I'm talking about customers that participate in RDRR. This is what I'm talking about from my perspective. A little bit of RDRR context and background and changes. This will probably some overlap with what Jill went through, but a little bit of how we see the evolution over the last couple of years and why we think this is important now. And then our two proposals, minimum on time and fixed dispatch cost, which we think are relatively modest changes to improve the accuracy of the economic dispatch. So that's the agenda. You want to go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so CLECA members are large customers, typically industrial customers. They produce goods essential for daily life. So all sorts of things from cement and steel for infrastructure, oxygen production for hospitals and other industrial gas uses, cold storage, food distribution, that sort of thing. So they're very large, and complex, and very high energy intensity. So think massive industrial sites. It's a big deal to shut them off. They have very high heat requirements, or in some cases, extremely low temperatures, like in the case of industrial gases. And they also have extremely precise chemical requirements, so tight chemical tolerances, 99.99% purity on industrial gases, for example, similar on steel or cement and other products. So that's what I think of. I know there's a lot of different kinds of customers that provide these resources, but when I think of these customers and the ones I represent, these are these large industrials that typically run all the time. When there's an emergency, they shut down. They're very reliable. It's a very valuable service to the grid, but it's a big deal to shut them down with very, very high costs. And so the idea is, how do we model that cost correctly when we're dispatching them? That's the whole premise here. Next slide, please. And we talk about RDRR in the CAISO context, but really RDRR is kind of the market integration side of what have historically been retail programs, and the largest of those is BIP. So BIP in some form or fashion has existed for decades, and RDRR is the method by which BIP is integrated into the wholesale market. So that's kind of the history as I understand it. RDRR has been dispatched both for system-wide emergency conditions and local transmission emergencies. I saw in the chat before people were talking about dispatches last year. There were dispatches for local transmission emergencies. So it could be that, or it could be system-wide emergency conditions. It's been one of the more reliable demand response products in the market over many, many years, particularly so in 2020 and 2022 when BIP was dispatched a number of times and helped prevent or ameliorate rolling outages. And the typical profile is these are not dispatched for 15 minutes or 30 minutes. They're typically dispatched for several hours over an entire emergency event. It's not on the slide, but the BIP retail tariff in particular has a 15 or 30-minute dispatch requirement. So I think we talked about a 40-minute CAISO requirement, but the retail tariffs are shorter responses. Next slide, please. So yeah, again, the vast majority of the megawatts participating in these programs are large C&I customers, and they're not in the primary business of selling electricity resources. That's not their main business. They're primarily in the business of producing their widget, producing their steel, their cement, their oxygen, whatever the case may be. And they participate in demand response to help lower their costs, which of course is a major challenge in California, and to help do their part to prevent rolling outages. These customers have typically high opportunity costs for each curtailment, anywhere from lost production. They have employees being paid without producing any product. There's often unproductive energy to regain temperature, either high or low, increased maintenance costs, restart costs, etc. And these are large, complicated operations. So they, if we have an event that's say 4 hours, it may take an additional 4 hours to restart. In some cases, longer. So it's different for every customer, but they don't restart right away. It takes them quite a while, typically. The third main bullet point here is just that RDRR has been declining in terms of megawatts for the last several years. There's probably multiple reasons for that, but one reason is high frequency of dispatch in recent years, particularly 2020, 2022. And what I hear from my clients is that the uncertainty about the frequency of dispatch in the future and the method by which they'll be dispatched has led to some people leaving the program or reducing the number of megawatts enrolled. So part of what we're trying to do is improve accuracy. And one of the goals of improving that accuracy is just market efficiency, but part of it also is to mitigate the potential for program attrition and hopefully start to regain some of these resources in the market that have been so reliable, especially in this era where resources are tight. Next slide, please. So I guess getting into some of the background on how these resources are dispatched. So historically, they've almost always been dispatched via forced or exceptional dispatch. So the big red button equivalent. And it's essentially at the discretion of CAISO operators when certain emergency conditions are met. RDRR can also be enabled for economic dispatch. That enablement is at the discretion of CAISO operators, but once enabled, automatic triggers would actually dispatch the resources. So that's really what we're talking about here is if the CAISO operators enable RDRR, what should trigger their dispatch once it's kind of outside of the hands of the operator. And the two proposals here are minimum on time and fixed dispatch cost. Just to clarify, they would only impact the economic dispatch. They would not touch forced or exceptional dispatch at all. So the operators would retain their ability to force dispatch or exceptionally dispatch RDRR, whether or not it was enabled in the market or not. So I think that's a key point. Next slide, please. So some of the history here, and this really to me is why this is an issue now and why it wasn't, say, several years ago. Historically, RDRR was available for economic dispatch under AWE warning conditions. This was a CAISO unique warning structure. And in 2022, CAISO implemented the NERC EEA standard. And when they implemented that standard, RDRR became available for dispatch under EEA1 conditions. So that's when CAISO translated the AWE system to EEA. That's how they made the transition. And then in the summer of 2023, the CPUC decided that RDRR should be available for dispatch earlier, and that it should be available in EEA watch conditions, so a full step earlier. So that ruling resulted in CAISO changing its its emergency procedures, 4420, to make RDR allowable for dispatch EEA1 to EEA watch. So that was the result of that RA decision. And the possibility of economic dispatch during EEA watch, which really is pre-emergency conditions, caused a lot of concern. And so really the fear was, is this resource going to be over dispatched economically if it's enabled much earlier in the process? And it also increased the importance of really accurately modeling and accurately characterizing the costs of economic dispatch. So that's kind of why we're talking about this now, and maybe why it wasn't such a concern a couple of years ago. Next slide, please. So I'll just introduce these two topics, then we'll go a little bit deeper on each one. So the first proposal is minimum on time, and this would, just like Jill was alluding to, it would increase the tariff allowed minimum on time, and modify the dispatch to respect minimum on time in the economic dispatch decision. That second piece, honestly, I'm a little confused based off what Jill was saying before. I understood that it was not being respected today. I don't know if that's my misunderstanding or if that's changed since in the last year or so. But those are the two pieces that's under discussion. So what is the appropriate minimum on time, and whatever that minimum on time is, ensuring that it's respected for economic dispatch. The second piece here is fixed dispatch cost. You call this just fixed cost or fixed startup cost. But the idea is, what is the cost that is not tied to the length or duration of a dispatch, but merely by calling a dispatch, the customer, the resource incurs that cost. And so, this is a very common concept in a traditional generator context. A natural gas plant maybe has to bring a boiler up to temperature before I can start producing power. And that process occurs with a certain cost, whether it's dispatched for 5 minutes or 5 hours, and that's built into the master file to decide, is it worth it to bring this to dispatch this resource or not? So it's the exact same concept here on the resource side. MOT and fixed dispatch costs were both proposed and included in the 2024 catalog process. And it's just a clarification, because I've heard this question. So these proposals are related, certainly, but they're not dependent on each other. So it could be the case that this working group decides to implement one and not the other, or one at one time and one at the other time. I think either one would make efforts to improve the situation, and certainly both are good ideas in my view, but they don't have to go together to be effective. Both these topics have very clear parallels to existing, resource costs in the master file. So there's a parallel to conventional resources in both cases. There are some tweaks, of course. It's a different kind of resource, but the concepts are very similar. And once again, the goal here is to both improve the accuracy of dispatch when they're dispatched economically, and one result of that would be to mitigate program attrition and retain this capacity that's so valuable. Next slide, please. So diving deeper into the minimum on time. So in December 2023, a workshop was held, and then January 2024, CAISO published a white paper essentially proposing minimum on time. And the white paper did a great job. It recognized the RDR dispatch issues related to resource optimization and accuracy. It talked about the issue of attrition, and impact on RDRR capacity, and just acknowledged that many of the participating demand response customers did have longer minimum on times than the current 1 hour. So this is really, we have a lot to build on with that white paper. And the other big piece is that, and Jill talked about this, the move from RTD to RTPD really opens up the possibilities here, where the longer time horizon of RTPD essentially allows a longer minimum on time beyond what was originally in the tariff of 1 hour. So what was originally proposed back in January 2024 is what you have on the screen there, which is a tariff change to go from 1 hour to 255 minutes combined between the startup time and the minimum on time. So that was kind of the proposal then as far as tariff change. But if you go to the next slide, in the proposal, and this is the piece that I'd be curious for Jill's reaction to now, because it might just be my misunderstanding. But in that paper, the CAISO explained that whatever the minimum on time was, it would not impact the economic dispatch. And I have the quote here that essentially it doesn't change economic dispatch. So if any 15-minute period was economic for dispatch, it would be dispatched and then held down for the entirety of the minimum on time. And there's a little bit of nuance here because it related to PMINs, where you could be dispatched but not dispatched officially, but with a PMIN of 0. I think that's a great conversation that I wouldn't claim to be able to fully explain. But I think this is the issue here. What is the appropriate minimum on time, and can we ensure that whatever the appropriate minimum on time is, that is respected for economic dispatch? So if we go down to the last bullet, essentially what we're proposing here is very, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, if you stay there just for a second. So essentially what we're proposing here is very similar to what was in that original January 2024 white paper, which is to change the tariff to allow longer minimum on times. And this is an important emphasis. It would not require longer minimum on times, but if the resource could show that it had a longer minimum on time, then that could be included in the master file, either for individual resources or for aggregations. And then essentially evaluate the economic evaluation of minimum on time for economic dispatch. So if it's being respected now, then great. If some change needs to happen to PMIN or some other characteristic, then let's make sure whatever the appropriate minimum on time is, that is respected for economic dispatch. So that's the MOT proposal, essentially. If you go to the next slide, the next topic, there's a little bit less, I guess, material to draw from, a little less historical discussion. But essentially the idea is that, the tariff rules today do not allow fixed costs to be included in the master file for RDRR. So all you have is that $950 to $1,000 per megawatt hour bid. But the reality is that there are fixed costs associated with dispatching these resources. And so, especially since they're eligible for dispatch so much earlier now, I think it's important that we accurately model them. And so there's a lot of discussion about that could be had about what are those resources, what are those fixed costs that are appropriate, how to incorporate them. And I don't have all the answers on that, but the idea is, should we incorporate whatever we determine are appropriate fixed costs before we dispatch these resources economically? Just to tie this together, I guess, the fixed costs to dispatch RDR for a one dispatch event rather than per minute or per hour are pretty clear. Some customers will have to scrap product. So if you've made oxygen, it has a certain purity, you'll lose that purity by cutting power. So you've lost economic product. Another example would be, hey, I'm operating my kiln at 2000 degrees. I lose my temperature. I'm down for however long it is. It's going to take me a lot of energy to regain that temperature. And that cost is fixed regardless of the duration of the event. So I think it's a pretty clear concept of how these costs relate to a dispatch event rather than duration, and how they relate to more conventional resources. So the questions are really, which of those costs are appropriate? How do we prove them or document them, and how should they be accurately included in a master file? So I don't know. I tried to go fairly quick there, but I think that's my last slide.
Thank you, Sam. We appreciate that. I want to turn it over to the community here to see if there are any questions. So we do have David. Oliver, let's go ahead and unmute David.
Yeah, just something to help my confusion. And this is the minimum on time of, I guess I'm confused. Jill seemed to be saying that the minimum on time, it needed to be economic for all 4 or 12 or whatever intervals. And in this one, in this presentation, it seems to be saying that it doesn't have to be. And I guess I'm confused as to what the actual case is here.
Yeah, that was a point of clarification I needed to make, that I was attempting to make in the information shared. And the white paper has not been updated to accurately reflect, because there was some testing that was done after that, because there was some inaccurate statement as to the use of minimum on time within the RTPD horizon. And again, there was an assumption within the white paper originally that this was considered in stock, and it definitely is not. So that still is maintained and accurate within the white paper. What we did update, but it was not reflected in the white paper, but I think, Sam, we did update CLICA on this particular item, that within the optimization horizon, it does look to ensure that over all of those intervals, looking at the startup time as well as the minimum on time, that it ensures that it is economic for all intervals within that horizon. And once it is determined to be economic and dispatched, the minimum on time is respected. So it will dispatch it over that full minimum on time. But the RTPD horizon is less than the stuck horizon. So that is the one thing that, the one thing that was why we kind of pulled that particular initiative, because it would consider the minimum on time, but it only looks out to that specific horizon. So when I made the comment that it would only marginally, change the decision, it's because you still are kind of limited as to the minimum on-time consideration in terms of its economic impact. Is that making sense? Because the horizon, again, looks out up to 7 15-minute intervals. So if the minimum on-time extends beyond that 7 15-minute intervals, the startup and minimum on-time, it will still just look at those intervals to see if it's economic. Because that's the only horizon it has to look at.
So I guess then the question is, what did Sam mean by it only needs to be on for it only really operates for 15 minutes?
Yeah, that was an assumption. That was in the paper. That was inaccurately reflected in the white paper. So subsequent to that white paper publication, we did additional testing and we did confirm that this is the accurate treatment.
Which one's the accurate treatment? I'm sorry.
That the optimization horizon, looking out those within those 7 15-minute intervals, will look to ensure that all of those intervals are economic before it makes a decision to dispatch. And once dispatched, it will keep it on for the full minimum on time. It will be respected.
So hey, Jill, can I ask? And this is, I tried to acknowledge my uncertainty on this one because it is complicated. But is it, you're talking about 7 15-minute intervals, but we're also talking about 255 minutes. So, which is 4.
Okay, let me clarify that, because again, that was tariff language that we were proposing when we were under the assumption that it was considered within stock. And that's the time horizon for stock, not for RTPD.
Okay, this, you know what?
That language was based on that assumption. You can still go to that 255 minutes, but again, in terms of how the optimization would work, it still would be reflective of the time horizon, the intervals under the RTPD time horizon. It's very complicated.
It is for sure.
Yeah.
So can I try to recap and answer David's question and submit my own understanding? So if we wanted to increase minimum on time a little bit within the RTPD time horizon, we could do that and it would respect whatever that minimum on time is, just as it does today. However, if we wanted to expand the minimum on time beyond that, like to 255 minutes, which is the stuck time horizon, then it wouldn't as of today, and we would need to talk through how to do that. Is that fair?
Right. If the minimum on time went out to 255, it would still only be looking at the RTPD intervals to make that dispatch decision. But once dispatch, I believe it would keep it on for the full minimum on time.
So and I guess maybe the other observation there. So, I mean, it's not necessarily just a should we do this or not, but you could say, hey, look, there's a relatively easy implementation if we increase the minimum on time to RTPD time horizon. It's a more complicated implementation if we increase it, say, to the stock time horizon. So there's variations of this proposal that we could talk through.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. I think it's around the time. I think you hit the nail right on the head, Sam. It's around the time horizons for the optimization to view it in. You know, I think we cited in our earlier conversation, meaning the first half of the session, that we are likely going to need to come back on the 26th with some additional conversation. I think we could probably stand to have a little bit of deeper conversation around the time horizons and make sure that the working group is going to be, that we have a clear understanding as we kind of move forward with both of these proposed problem statements around minimum on time and then this fixed dispatch cost. Sam, thank you very much for presenting. I hope that you're also able to engage with us at the next working group session where we kind of continue this conversation. I know you're also fighting time zones, so thank you very much for joining us here today. I do want to kind of give it to you for maybe some closing thoughts, if you have any, Sam, before we kind of pick the conversation back up at the next session.
No, just appreciate the opportunity and look forward to continued dialogue.
Likewise. Thank you, Sam. So taking a look at time, again, I think we're gonna extend our conversation on a couple of problem statement refinements or formulations at the next session. I do want to go ahead and let's go ahead and move forward to the next slide. We do also have John and Rhett from Southern Cal Edison, and so gentlemen, we do have your submissions, your catalog submissions reflected here. And so we'd like to go ahead and give you guys the floor to kind of walk us through these, if you don't mind.
Who?
Rhett?
Sure, we can do that. This is Rhett from SoCal Edison.
Oh, can we skip another slide? I apologize.
Yeah.
Let's go next slide. Sorry, Rhett. And there we go. So Rhett, we have you queued up for the increase to the 100 megawatt cap. Apologies, please go ahead.
Sure, yeah, no problem. So we've been doing RDRRs since their inception. So we have, like 11 years of experience with these. And over the years, we've noticed a number of problems with them operationally. And so we've got just really 3 items here, probably some more, but we'll talk about 3 items here that we've been talking about for years and just hoping to get addressed. So the first one that we're talking about here is the size limit on a resource that's classified as discrete, and currently with the limit being 100. We have resources that are larger than that are discrete in nature, and so we're stuck in this conundrum of how to properly model them. Our ask is that that the discrete limit be increased to allow for properly representing our resources in the master file. In terms of the exceptions, we can't meet the exceptions because of the number of smaller sites that make up the aggregation to get to that, to the megawatt level. So we can generally meet 3 of the 4 conditions, but we can't meet the condition of being all being on the same location. So I guess there's a couple of ways you could go after it: either raise the limit or loosen the exceptions. So that's it for the first item. We go to the next slide. The second operational item we noticed is that, right, so given the dispatchable options that you can choose between a 5, 15, and 16-minute dispatchable option, unfortunately, by choosing what you choose as a dispatchable option drives what the market uses as a startup time. So if you choose a 5-minute option, the RTPD will utilize your startup time in the master file, which is the way we believe it should work. If you choose a 15-minute dispatchable option, RTPD automatically assigns you a 22.5-minute startup time, which, if chosen, would slow down resource response. If you choose a 60-minute dispatchable option, RTPD automatically assigns you a 52.5-minute startup time, which again slows down your response time should you be dispatched into the market. So our ask is that that the market utilizes the startup time as found in the master file, regardless of your dispatchable 5, 15, or 16-minute option. Next slide. And then our third choice has to do with the restriction that's currently in place for RDRs on outage submittal. Currently, outages are only allowed for the full capacity of the resource. We found over the years that because these are shared resources, shared between the marketing side and the reliability side of Edison, where the FERC FLC Standards of Conduct division happens. So sometimes these RDRs or a portion of the RDRs are dispatched for a local reliability need. In those cases, a portion of the resources megawatts are no longer available to the market because they're already being consumed for a local small reliability need. And so we have no way of communicating to the ISO that a portion of a resource is no longer available for dispatch. So we get put in a spot where it's difficult to communicate what is left, what is actually remaining for dispatch in the market on that resource. So you get put into a spot where you either take the whole thing out or you leave it all in, both of which are incorrect. So that's our third operational ask. So those are the three things that we laid out here. Certainly there are other things that we've noticed over the years. Having a PMIN greater than 0 would certainly be appreciated. We would also appreciate it if the SC would be notified when the resources get enabled. Right now, 4420 says that as a warning, the ISO operators have the option to enable into the market. We would like it if the SC would be notified when they're enabled, once the option is exercised. And then the last thing would be that if anything could be done about those resource IDs, that would help us. It would help us during dispatch as well. We didn't put those on our slides, but those are just some of the things that we've certainly noticed over the years. We can put that in comments as well, and we'll certainly take questions on the three things or the other things we mentioned as well at this point.
I really appreciate it, Rhett, and I got a big smile on the resource IDs. I think thankfully we don't need tariff changes for that one, but we do need some implementation changes on that one. So I'm happy to take that one up with you guys offline to try to help with some clarity around the resource IDs. I do have a question. When you say that the available megawatts for some of the RDRs are functional weather, is that skewed representation in the quantity of megawatts then it's an overestimation, or you're just taking the whole thing out, which then is an underestimation? Could you help me understand that portion of the slide that we have up currently?
On that last bullet there?
Yeah.
I think that was more for informational and kind of awareness that a large, I think all these are, all of our RDR resources are weather dependent. So you're stuck again trying to make the PMAX and the RDT right. It can't be right every single hour because of the the nature of the day, and certainly changes over the course of the month. And if there's happens to be like a big swing, say intraday on on one of the tough days, there's really no way to communicate that, programmatically communicate that what we're saying or what we bid that the resource is good for really isn't quite right because of the unexpected changes in the weather. And since the outages are only allowed to communicate, full availability or full unavailability, we really don't have any tools or mechanisms to make, to inform folks of what the real situation is and how many megawatts they could actually expect.
Just kind of curious in terms of the time frame, because you can in real time change your bids to reflect. Are you saying that this could happen after you've submitted a real-time bid?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't get caught up either on the weather nature of it. I think the real driver, so certainly inside the 75-minute window, right? You're submitting bids 75 minutes in advance. It got to be done and validated by then. So which means you have to start sooner, right? And given the difficulty in knowing which resource you're working with, it's it's a very, let's say, labor-intensive process to get those things right. Especially these are kind of exception-based resources. But the real driver, I would say, is the shared nature of them. that our reliability side of the house can take and does take and has taken small fractions of a resource, 10%, 15% of the resource to deal with a local reliability need, and there's no way to communicate that. And that would be happening right away, right? That would certainly be inside the bid window. That would be right now.
Right, and really outage wouldn't help that either way, right? That's what, I'm trying to make the connection between how outage changes to the outage time frame. I mean, aren't you still, wouldn't it still be not within the time frame?
Sorry, maybe I'm not being clear. Yeah, I'm not saying changes to the outage time frame. I'm saying give us the capability to partially derate a resource in OMS.
And I'm asking the difference between the timing between putting in an outage versus just reflecting in your bid. Is there a big difference?
Yes.
No, I think
yes.
Right, what you're saying is the outage you can put in is full unit availability. And if the SCE reliability side of the house, let's just for the sake of easy math, 100 megawatt resource, you use 10 megawatts of it, there's no way to then reflect that those 10 megawatts are no longer available, the 90 remain.
In the bid.
In the bid, is that?
Right, you can't put it into the bid because it's happening now for now. Bids are.
Can you put it into an outage now and reflect it? That's my question. I don't know the outage time.
You cannot. You cannot put that into an outage now. The functionality to allow you to do a partial derate on an RDR resource does not exist.
Okay, I know that that functionality does not exist, but I'm trying to reconcile the timing of changing a bid versus the timing of putting in a derate.
Yeah, so the derate would take effect immediately.
Okay. To the market.
Right.
I just didn't know the timeline.
Got it, okay, all right. No, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Next scheduled window, so there's a slight delay.
Next dispatch, yeah.
Thank you, John, for that's where I was going.
Got it. All right, so let's open this up to the community. Any other thoughts or questions for the SCE team as it relates to the discrete dispatch over 100 megawatts, the 15 or 60-minute RDR bid options, and the utilization of start time in master file, or the ability to derate across that range of PMIN to PMAX. Daniel, I see your hand. Appreciate that. Let's go ahead and unmute Daniel, please.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering for the SCE experts on the call here, can you say what the coincidence is of a UDC level dispatch of a part of an RDRR resource, for instance, for a transmission emergency like we saw last year with SoCal Edison, and in parallel system level conditions that would warrant that? Because I'm thinking back on the past several years, and I don't recall those being things that typically happen at the same time, but I'm wondering if that's been your experience.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I'm trying to think through that as well. I think they've certainly happened. So the local side happens a lot less often. And I think they've happened in times where we've at least been prepared, or it's been a high stress day. I can't recall specifically if they've both happened concurrently, but it feels like the activity and the work around it and the preparation, is all kind of concurrent. Whether or not it actually got triggered or not, I'm not exactly sure.
Thanks. And then if I could ask one more follow-up question, maybe this is more for the CAISO side. It seems like historically, and this seems to be reflected by this slide here, when the ISO dispatches RDRR, it's always been across the entire balancing area, the entirety of the resources. So that could be 500 to 800 megawatts of load shed. And to me, it makes sense when we were talking about the 100 megawatt or potentially raising or eliminating 100 megawatt per resource discrete dispatch limit. It kind of makes sense because as it is, the operators are shedding several hundred megawatts at once. And I just wanted to confirm that the CAISO staff have talked to the operators and they have no concerns with increasing or eliminating the 100 megawatt discrete dispatch limit on.
We haven't at this stage. We did when we increased it from 50 to 100, and they were willing to go to 100, and they were willing to go above 100 under those conditions being met. It was almost like they would consider it. But to your point, I think that is somewhat correct. Historically, outside of some local transmission dispatches where we are being more selective as to where, but even then, we go for all the megawatts within that local area. When we do get into system emergencies, you know, it normally does get fully dispatched, whatever is available. So I think that can be somewhat of a correct assumption. But we have not gone back to the operations to request that it be, you know, just dispatched above whatever the megawatts are. So that would have to be some conversation that would have to go into a policy proposal decision.
And I think that might be more a product, Daniel, of where we are within the working group, right? I think we're formulating that problem statement. Once we have that, we're going to then go through and, you know, vet each problem statement a little bit more thoroughly. Those types of operational implementation, you know, risks or feedback would be collected at that time in the process of DDEMI, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah, thanks for that. And just to clarify one thing that Jill said, is it CAISO that dispatches for transmission emergencies, or is it the UDCs that do that in collaboration with CAISO?
Well, I think there is a provision to, I think, what was just presented, that there are local emergencies that these can be dispatched by the utilities. There are also more localized transmission issues that could be dispatched by the ISO. So there is a shared use of these resources. You know, it's recognized that the UDC could dispatch them for their own local needs.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Christina, do we have any additional hands or comments in the chat?
I'm not seeing any other questions coming in at this time.
Okay, let's go ahead. We're running right up on top of the hour. Let's go ahead and move to our next slide. One more. All right, so next steps. We do have, I think, we have a lot of content that the community kind of either highlighted or explicitly asked for that we're going to be coming back to on the following working group. So I think we'll take a second pass at some of those enhancing demand flexibility market option problem statements, aiming to finalize those at the next session, as well as some additional content to just make sure that we're bolstering the understanding. I think we also had a couple of items here on reliability-based DR. So we'll take the same approach. We'll come back with what the ISO has heard, maybe some additional material or level setting material. For those who presented, we will be reaching out to you guys offline to just make sure that maybe we can expeditiously move the conversation along. And then in the back half of the next session, we do want to tackle or at least begin tackling economic demand response. So currently underneath that theme, we have a refresh of our PDR programs, which we heard pretty generally today and across these themes. So this was one that maybe has its tendrils through multiple themes, as well as the modified PDR. So that's going to be, I think, a very content-filled day. So we will be noticing as quickly as we can so that all of you can plan accordingly for that July 29th meeting and make sure that, that we have a really good conversation very similar to what we did today. I sincerely appreciate everybody's time and all of the engagement, in particular with each other. This was incredibly informative, and I think that when we get to the halfway point of our next session, we will net some finalized problem statements from it. Christina, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide here, and I will turn this over to you.
Thanks, Juan. So I just have a couple more next steps before we wrap up for the day. We have comments due this Friday, the 11th, regarding the posted discussion paper, which was posted on June 13th. And meeting materials are available on the initiative webpage, linked here. Any further updates will be referenced in a notice. And if you have any additional questions that come up, you can always reach out to us at ISO Stakeholder Affairs at CAISO.com, or you can reach out to me directly at cguimera@CAISO.com. And now we just have a couple quick announcements before we wrap up today. Here you can see some of the meetings taking place at the ISO this week. And you can also see a few comment deadlines we have. And here you can see business practice manual updates occurring this week. And lastly, for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. Here you can see our latest blog posts regarding CAISO governance continuing to evolve with EDAM's broadening reach. So with that, I'm not seeing any additional questions coming up. So with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's discussion. And as a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. All meeting materials are available online, and the video file will be posted soon. Thank you, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.